What if the feeling that something inside you is dormant isn't imagination at all? What if the quiet sense that you're thinking, feeling, and living below your true capacity is not a flaw, but a signal? Have you ever noticed moments when your mind feels divided? One part of you wants clarity, logic, direction. Another part longs for intuition, creativity, meaning. As if two inner currents are flowing side by side, rarely meeting. And in that separation, something essential gets lost. Ancient traditions spoke of wholeness of mind. Modern science speaks of specialization. Yet between these two worlds lies a truth few people stop to question. Maybe the problem is not that your mind is weak, but that it is fragmented. You were never meant to operate in pieces. Inside your brain, billions of signals are moving every second. Electrical whispers, chemical tides, silent conversations shaping every thought, every emotion, every decision you make. And still, most people experience their lives as if they were using only a narrow corridor of that vast inner space. Repeating the same thoughts, the same reactions, the same emotional patterns, day after day. Not because they lack intelligence, but because something deeper is out of alignment. Imagine an orchestra where every musician is skilled, yet they never play in rhythm. The problem wouldn't be talent, it would be synchronization. And without harmony, even the most powerful instruments fail to move the soul. Your mind works the same way. Logic without intuition becomes rigid. Creativity without structure becomes chaos. Emotion without clarity becomes noise. But when these forces align, when different parts of the mind begin to move together, something rare happens. Perception sharpens. Thoughts slow down. Insight appears without force. You don't just think better. You experience reality differently. This is not about forcing your brain to work harder. It's about allowing it to work together. Most people are never taught this. They are taught to choose sides, rational or emotional, analytical or creative, left or right. And in doing so, they unknowingly train their minds to remain divided, always compensating, never integrated. Yet there is a state where the mind stops pulling against itself, a state where mental noise quiets, where understanding feels immediate, almost effortless. And once you recognize that this state exists, it becomes impossible to ignore the question that follows. What if the limits you've accepted as normal are simply the result of a mind that has never been fully synchronized? There are moments in daily life that are easy to ignore until they happen too often to be dismissed. You wake up from a dream that feels unusually vivid. Not random images, but scenes charged with emotion. A face you haven't seen in years. A place that doesn't exist yet feels familiar. You carry the sensation with you throughout the morning, as if something followed you out of sleep and into the day. You try to explain it away, but the feeling remains. Or maybe it happens while you're fully awake. A sudden pressure in the chest for no medical reason. A tightness behind the eyes, a wave of emotion that arrives without warning, sadness, clarity, urgency, then disappears just as quickly. People call it stress, fatigue, overthinking. Yet deep down, you sense that explanation doesn't fully fit. Then there are the moments of intuition. You think of someone you haven't spoken to in years, and hours later, they reach out. You feel an unexplained resistance toward a decision that looks perfect on paper, or you sense, without logic, that something is about to change, good or bad, before any external sign appears. These experiences often come quietly, without drama, yet they leave a mark. Most people are taught to suppress these moments, to rationalize them, to label them coincidence, to distrust what cannot be measured or easily explained. And so, a subtle pain forms, not sharp, but persistent. The discomfort of feeling that there is more happening inside you than you are allowed to acknowledge. The unease of sensing meaning without having a language for it. Over time, this disconnect grows. You start living on the surface of your own awareness while something deeper keeps trying to communicate. This is where confusion begins. People feel mentally exhausted even when they haven't done much. They struggle to focus, yet their thoughts never stop. They crave clarity, but feel overwhelmed by information. Emotionally, they swing between numbness and intensity, unable to find balance. Spiritually, they feel drawn to something greater, yet unsure how to access it without losing control or grounding. What if these struggles are not signs of weakness, but symptoms of misalignment? What if the dreams, the physical sensations, the intuitive flashes are not distractions, but signals, a subtle language spoken by parts of the mind that are active, intelligent, and deeply connected, yet rarely heard together? Modern life trains the mind to fragment itself. One mode for work, another for emotion, another for creativity, another for survival. We switch constantly, never staying long enough in one state to feel whole. And in that constant switching, the inner dialogue becomes noise rather than guidance. But beneath that noise, something precise is happening. Your mind is always communicating with itself. Different systems exchanging information, different rhythms competing for dominance. And when those rhythms fall out of sync, the messages arrive distorted, felt as anxiety, confusion, restlessness, or unexplained sensations. This is why so many people feel that something is off without being able to name it. They sense meaning but lack integration. They receive signals but don't know how to interpret them. They feel called inward, yet live outward. And the most unsettling part is this. Once you start noticing these patterns, you can't unsee them. The dreams feel more deliberate. The intuitions feel sharper. The physical sensations feel intentional, almost instructional, which raises a question that quietly challenges everything you thought you knew about your inner world. What if these experiences are not random at all, but the early signs of a mind trying to function as a unified whole? There is a moment in every genuine awakening when confusion gives way to recognition. Not because something new appears, but because something ancient finally makes sense. The first great spiritual signal is not a vision, a voice, or a supernatural event. It is far more subtle, and that is why it has been misunderstood for centuries. It is the moment when the mind begins to sense itself. When awareness turns inward and notices that thoughts, emotions, intuition, and bodily sensations are not separate experiences, but expressions of a single, coordinated intelligence. Ancient teachings hinted at this without naming it directly. In early Eastern traditions, it was described as the union of inner forces. In Hermetic philosophy, as the reconciliation of opposites. In sacred texts, as having eyes to see and ears to hear. Different cultures, different languages, but the same truth. The mind speaks in layers, and the first sign of awakening is learning to recognize its unified voice. Most people mistake mental noise for thinking. They assume that clarity comes from more effort, more control, more force. But the old teachings warned against this. They spoke of stillness not as emptiness, but as alignment, a state where inner systems stop competing and begin cooperating. This is where modern understanding quietly confirms ancient wisdom. Your brain is not a single command center. It is a living network, multiple systems constantly exchanging information. Neurons carry signals, but they do not work alone. Supporting cells regulate, refine, amplify, and sometimes silence those signals. Different regions process logic, emotion, memory, space, and meaning. When these systems operate in isolation, the mind feels scattered. When they align, perception becomes clear. The first spiritual signal is the felt awareness of this alignment beginning. People often describe it as a sudden calm without explanation. Or a moment when a problem they've struggled with for years resolves itself without conscious effort. Sometimes it appears as emotional release, tears that come without sadness, relief without cause. Other times, it's a physical sensation, warmth in the chest, pressure at the center of the head, a deep breath that feels different from all the others. These are not accidents. Ancient teachers describe this as the mind remembering its original order, not learning something new, but restoring balance that had been lost through habit, stress, and fragmentation. They understood that the mind, when synchronized, does not need to search for meaning. It recognizes it instantly. This is why some insights feel immediate and undeniable. You don't argue with them. You don't analyze them. You know. And here is where the teaching becomes uncomfortable for modern thinking. Not all thoughts come from the same place. Some are surface reactions, conditioned, repetitive, protective. Others emerge from a deeper coordination of the mind. The ancients warned that when people confuse the two, they mistake noise for truth and truth for imagination. The first spiritual discipline then was never belief, it was discernment, learning to recognize when the mind is fragmented and when it is speaking as one. This is why practices across cultures emphasized balance rather than intensity. Balanced breathing, balanced posture, balanced attention. They weren't rituals for worship, they were tools for synchronization. Ways to bring different parts of the mind into rhythm so that insight could surface naturally. Once this rhythm begins to form, something changes quietly but permanently. People stop feeling divided, decisions feel clearer, intuition becomes grounded rather than impulsive, logic becomes flexible rather than rigid. And perhaps most importantly, fear loses its grip. Not because danger disappears, but because the mind is no longer fighting itself. This knowledge was never meant to be widespread. Not because it was dangerous, but because it requires responsibility. A synchronized mind is not easily controlled. It does not react automatically. It observes before it moves. That is why, across history, this understanding was passed in small circles, through direct experience rather than explanation. You couldn't be told, you had to recognize it within yourself. If this resonates even slightly, it means something inside you is already responding. And if you feel drawn to explore this deeper, you're not alone. There is a quiet circle of people who value this kind of understanding, who choose awareness over distraction and clarity over noise. If you feel aligned with that intention, a simple gesture like liking this video or subscribing is a way of stepping into that shared space of exploration. Because what comes next depends on something most people never question. What happens when this inner synchronization doesn't just appear briefly, but becomes intentional? There was a period in my life when everything looked fine from the outside, yet inside I felt constantly misaligned. My days were productive, my routines disciplined, my conversations normal. But beneath that surface, something felt off, like walking with one foot slightly out of rhythm. Not painful enough to stop me, but persistent enough to drain me. I remember one particular evening with unsettling clarity. The room was dim, lit only by a small lamp near the window. Outside, rain tapped softly against the glass, creating a slow, repetitive rhythm. I sat at the table, staring at my hands, feeling an exhaustion that sleep never seemed to fix. My thoughts raced, yet none of them felt useful. Ideas started but never finished. Emotions surfaced without context. It was as if my mind was crowded, but disconnected. That night, something unusual happened. As I closed my eyes, not to sleep, just to rest, I felt a strange internal stillness. Not silence, but coordination. My breathing slowed on its own. My shoulders relaxed without effort, and for the first time in a long while, my thoughts stopped overlapping. They lined up, one at a time, calm, precise. Images surfaced, Not like dreams, but like memories that didn't belong to a specific moment. I saw myself reacting automatically in situations that didn't deserve urgency. I saw patterns repeating, the same doubts, the same emotional shortcuts, the same internal arguments. And then something shifted. Instead of judging those patterns, I observed them. It felt as if two parts of my mind that usually spoke over each other had finally learned to listen. Logic didn't suppress emotion. Emotion didn't overpower reason. They stood side by side, interpreting the same experience from different angles, yet arriving at the same conclusion. The sensation was physical. A warmth spread through my chest. A gentle pressure formed behind my eyes. My breath deepened, not forced, not controlled, just naturally fuller. I wasn't thinking my way through insight. I was receiving it. In that moment, I realized something unsettling and liberating at the same time. My struggles weren't caused by lack of discipline or intelligence. They came from internal desynchronization. Different parts of my mind pulling in different directions, each convinced it was right. That night didn't change my life instantly, but it changed the direction of it. Over the following days, small things began to shift. Decisions that once took hours of mental debate became clear within minutes. Emotional reactions softened, not because I felt less, but because I understood more. Even my body responded. Tension I had normalized began to dissolve. Sleep felt deeper. Focus lasted longer. The most surprising change, however, was internal honesty. I started noticing how often I ignored subtle signals, fatigue disguised as ambition, intuition overridden by habit, emotional resistance masked as logic. Synchronization didn't make life perfect. It made it coherent. And I realized this experience wasn't unique to me. Over time, others shared similar stories, different details, same pattern, moments of unexpected calm, sudden clarity after years of mental noise, physical sensations paired with emotional release. Each story carried the same undertone. When the mind stops fighting itself, understanding arrives quietly but powerfully. That's why these experiences matter. They remind us that awakening doesn't always come as a dramatic event. Sometimes it arrives as alignment, as the simple realization that you no longer feel divided inside. If any part of this story feels familiar, if you've ever experienced a dream that lingered, a physical sensation without cause, a moment of clarity that felt given rather than created, I invite you to share it. Write your experience or signal in the comments. I read them carefully, and some resonate so deeply that they deserve to be spoken aloud in future conversations. Because the question that began forming in me that night still echoes now, quietly but insistently. What becomes possible when this inner alignment stops happening by chance and starts being activated on purpose? The second great spiritual sign is quieter than the first, and that is exactly why it is so often overlooked. It appears not as a moment of stillness, but as resistance, a subtle inner hesitation when you are about to act automatically, a pause that interrupts a familiar reaction, a strange feeling of not this way when logic insists otherwise. Most people dismiss this as doubt or fear, but in truth it is something far more precise. It is the signal of synchronization beginning to guide behavior. When the mind starts functioning as an integrated whole, it doesn't just produce insight, it produces interruption. Old habits no longer flow uninterrupted. Thought patterns that once felt inevitable begin to slow down. Emotional reactions that used to explode now hesitate, as if waiting for permission. This hesitation is not weakness, it is intelligence recalibrating itself. Ancient teachings spoke of this as the guardian at the threshold. Not a mystical being, but an inner mechanism that activates when awareness deepens. It prevents the mind from slipping back into automatic patterns without conscious consent. Modern psychology would call this meta-awareness. Spiritual traditions called it awakening discernment. You feel it when you're about to say something you've said 1,000 times before, and suddenly you stop. When you reach for distraction and feel an inner resistance. When you are about to repeat a familiar choice, and something inside asks quietly, why? This is the second sign. The moment when the synchronized mind begins to intervene. And here is the key most people never receive. You are not meant to fight this signal. You are meant to listen to it. The mistake many make is trying to analyze it immediately, to label it, to judge it. But this signal does not speak in words. It speaks in timing, in pauses, in shifts of attention. That is why the technique connected to this secret is disarmingly simple, the pause of alignment. When you notice resistance, any hesitation, tightening, or sudden awareness, do not push forward and do not retreat. Instead, pause for 10 seconds, just 10. Bring your attention to your breath, not to control it, but to observe it. Notice where the breath feels strongest in your body: chest, abdomen, throat, nose. Then ask one silent question without forcing an answer. Which part of me is reacting right now? Do not search for words. Do not explain. Just notice what arises. Sometimes it will be an image, sometimes a physical sensation, sometimes nothing at all. That is fine. The purpose of this pause is not information, it is integration. In those few seconds, different systems of the mind are allowed to synchronize before action resumes. Over time, this rewires how decisions are made. You move less from habit and more from coherence. People who practice this consistently report subtle but profound changes. Emotional reactions soften, mental fatigue decreases, decisions feel cleaner, even mistakes feel more instructive than draining. Life becomes less reactive, more intentional. And here is the most encouraging truth of all. This is not a gift reserved for monks, mystics, or scholars. It is a natural function of the human mind when given space to coordinate itself. Anyone can access it, anyone can strengthen it. All it requires is attention without force. Each time you honor that pause, you reinforce synchronization. Each time you ignore it, the signal fades slightly, but it never disappears entirely. It waits. Yet this second sign is still only the surface. There is a deeper signal, far less discussed, rarely recognized, and almost never explained openly. A signal that does not appear as calm or resistance, but as a profound internal shift in identity itself. Most people experience it once in their lives without understanding what it was, and then spend years trying to return to it. That signal is real, and it changes everything once recognized. If you feel drawn to uncover it, subscribing is a simple way to stay connected to this circle of understanding, because what comes next is not just about synchronizing the mind. It is about crossing a threshold that very few people realize even exists. There is a moment that almost no one is prepared for, not because it is dramatic, but because it is disarming. The deepest spiritual signal does not arrive as excitement. It does not come with visions, voices, or emotional intensity. Instead, it arrives as a quiet collapse of separation, a moment when the question, "Who am I?" stops demanding an answer, because it dissolves. This is the signal few teachings describe clearly, and even fewer people recognize when it happens. Ancient traditions hinted at it in fragments. Christian mystics spoke of dying before death. Early contemplatives described it as the moment when the observer and the observed become one. In esoteric Christianity, it was symbolized by the tearing of the veil, when inner and outer reality cease to feel divided. Modern language struggles to name it. But its essence is simple and unsettling. The mind no longer feels like a collection of parts. Up to this point, synchronization feels like harmony, balance, cooperation between systems. But this signal goes further. It is not cooperation, it is unity. The sense that thought, awareness, intuition, and presence are no longer moving toward each other. They are moving as one. People often experience it unexpectedly, in moments of deep stillness, during grief or surrender, sometimes in prayer, sometimes in silence, sometimes while doing nothing at all. There is no build-up, no warning. And then, suddenly, there is a shift. Time feels different, not slower or faster, but irrelevant. The mind is alert, yet completely at rest. Thoughts may still arise, but they no longer pull attention. Emotions may pass through, but they leave no residue. There is no effort to observe. Observation simply is. This is not dissociation. It is the opposite. It is presence without division. In this state, something profound becomes obvious, not as an idea, but as direct knowing. You are not the voice in the mind. You are not the emotional wave. You are not even the observer watching them. You are the field in which all of it appears. This realization has echoed across centuries. I and the Father are one. The kingdom of God is within you. Be still and know. These were never metaphors meant to inspire belief. They were descriptions of a state of consciousness where separation collapses. Physics now approaches this truth from another direction. At the quantum level, separation is an illusion of scale. Particles do not exist independently. They arise in relationship. Observation changes outcomes. Reality is not a collection of objects, it is a web of interactions. Consciousness, in this view, is not produced by matter alone. It is a fundamental participant. When the mind synchronizes completely, it mirrors this structure. The sense of me here and world out there softens. Action flows without internal debate. Insight arrives without reasoning. Compassion arises without effort. And fear, deep, existential fear, loses its foundation because there is no longer a separate self to defend. This is why this signal was once considered dangerous, not because it harms, but because it frees. A mind that recognizes itself as unified is difficult to manipulate. It does not respond predictably to fear, urgency, or identity-based pressure. It listens deeply, it moves deliberately, it sees through surface narratives. And this understanding has always been transmitted carefully, quietly, from those who experienced it to those who were ready to recognize it, not as doctrine, but as direct invitation. If this content resonates, if it feels like something you already know but have never heard expressed this way, that recognition matters, this work is done with passion, not profit. Each like, each subscription strengthens a community that values depth over distraction and awareness over noise. Supporting it is a way of saying this kind of understanding still matters, yet even this is not the end, because once the mind touches unity, a new question arises, one that ancient texts left deliberately unanswered. If this state is real, why doesn't it remain? If you have followed this journey from the beginning, one truth should now feel unmistakably clear. None of the signals we explored were random. Not the dreams, not the subtle sensations, not the pauses, the resistance, or the moments of deep stillness. Each one was an invitation to remember something essential about yourself. Awakening is not about becoming someone new. It is about recognizing what has always been present beneath layers of habit, noise, and distraction. The mind was never broken. It was simply trained to operate in fragments. And when fragments begin to listen to one another, life changes. Not suddenly, not magically, but meaningfully. You start to notice how often you live on autopilot, how many decisions are driven by fear rather than clarity, how often your inner signals were dismissed because they didn't fit logic or expectation. And yet, here you are, listening, reflecting, feeling something resonate beyond words. That matters. Because awakening does not happen to everyone at the same time or in the same way. It unfolds quietly, through recognition, through moments when something inside you says, "This feels true." Not emotionally exciting, just true. Your journey is part of something larger. Across cultures, generations, and belief systems, humans have always sensed that consciousness is not accidental, that awareness has depth, that the mind, when aligned, becomes a bridge between thought and intuition, between action and meaning, between the visible and the unseen. This is not about escaping the world. It is about engaging with it more fully. When your mind is synchronized, you don't withdraw from life. You meet it with presence. You listen more deeply. You react less automatically. You act from coherence rather than impulse. And slowly, the world around you begins to reflect that inner order. Relationships soften. Decisions clarify. Even uncertainty feels less threatening because you are no longer divided inside. And here is the quiet mission hidden beneath everything we've explored. Awakening is not meant to isolate you. It is meant to connect you. To yourself, yes, but also to others who are walking this same path, often silently, often without language for what they feel. That is why community matters, not as an audience, not as followers, but as a shared space of recognition. If something in this video touched you, grounded you, or opened a new perspective, I invite you to take one simple step. Leave a comment with your name and the city you're watching from. It's more than a gesture. It's a way of acknowledging your presence in this moment. I read these comments, and in future videos, I'll share special greetings to those who step forward. If you feel aligned with this work, support it by liking the video and subscribing to the channel. This content is created with intention and passion, not for profit, but to keep these conversations alive. Every subscription strengthens this circle of awareness and allows these ideas to reach those who may be searching without knowing what they're looking for. And now, as this chapter closes, let one final thought linger, not as an answer, but as a doorway. When the mind becomes whole, the question is no longer, what am I capable of? It becomes, what am I here to remember? Subscribe.